Iran didn't lose this war with missiles. It lost it with a map. For 40 years, one narrow strip of water let Tehran punch far above its weight and hold the entire global economy on edge. But right now, as you watch this, Saudi Arabia and the UAE are quietly funding a construction plan so massive that it doesn't just bypass Iran's power, it deletes it from the equation, not by bombing a single base, not by sinking a single ship, by carving a new route for the world's lifeblood: energy. Because if this project is completed, the one card Iran has played in every crisis, every negotiation, every nuclear standoff, simply stops working. And the most shocking part is that the first version of this plan is already underway in pieces. Through pipelines, ports, and a revived multi-hundred-billion-dollar canal concept the Gulf once shelved as too crazy and is now seriously bringing back. To understand why this canal idea is so explosive, you first need to understand the trap the world walked into decades ago. On a normal map, the Strait of Hormuz just looks like a narrow blue line between Iran and Oman. In reality, that tiny line is a loaded weapon. At its narrowest point, the strait is roughly 21 miles wide. That's it. 21 miles separating the Persian Gulf from the Gulf of Oman and ultimately the open ocean. Through this slim corridor flows nearly a fifth of the world's oil, day after day, year after year. Tankers from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, and Qatar all squeeze through this same maritime bottleneck, carrying the fuel that powers factories in China, keeps the lights on in Japan, and runs the ports of Europe. Now look at where Iran sits, right on the northern edge of the strait. Its coastline, its islands, its missile sites and naval bases are all positioned like a hand wrapped around the world's throat. For decades, that geography gave Tehran a silent threat it never had to say out loud. If you push us too hard, if sanctions bite too deep, if you challenge us in Syria, Yemen, Iraq, or Lebanon, we can close this artery and send global markets into chaos. That wasn't just military leverage, it was diplomatic blackmail. Every negotiation over Iran's nuclear program, every sanctions package discussed in Washington or Brussels, was haunted by one question. What happens if they shut the strait? The answer was always the same. Energy prices spike, shipping insurance explodes, and the world rushes into crisis mode. For years, everyone assumed that threat would stay in the shadows, a card Tehran would wave, never fully play. But then, the 2026 crisis hit, and Iran did something many analysts thought it would never actually do. In the immediate aftermath of Tehran's confrontation with the United States, Iranian leadership made the move everyone had feared, but no one believed they would risk. They effectively shut down the Strait of Hormuz. Mines, threats to tankers, military posturing, whatever combination of tools they used, the effect was the same. Traffic slowed, then halted. Hundreds of ships sat idle. Global supply chains shuttered. It wasn't just a news headline, it was an economic heart attack. Every hour, the strait stayed unsafe. Billions of dollars in cargo sat still. Refiners in Asia watched their feedstock dry up. Insurance companies scrambled to price risk no model had ever properly accounted for. Traders watched oil prices spike into territory politicians dread. In Gulf capitals, leaders were watching something else: vulnerability. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, and Iraq suddenly saw in real time what it meant to let one hostile neighbor control the only maritime exit for their main export. The nightmare scenario they had spent decades trying to avoid was unfolding live, and they knew it could happen again at any time. That's the moment a quiet but irreversible decision was made in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi. Never again. Never again would the ability of their economies, and by extension the world's economy, to function depend on Iran not having a bad day. Never again would a single choke point define their strategic future. The question wasn't whether to act. It was how far they were willing to go to escape that trap. And the answer turned out to be much further than anyone realized. On a map, the solution looks deceptively simple. Look south of Iran, to the Musandam Peninsula, the jagged Omani outcrop that juts toward the Strait of Hormuz from the Arabian side. This peninsula forms the southern lip of the strait, and its geography is wild: steep mountains, deep fjord-like inlets, and cliffs that plunge into the sea. Now imagine drawing a line across it. The idea on the table is brutally straightforward. Dig a canal straight through that peninsula, connecting the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman without ever entering Iranian-controlled waters. A ship leaving Saudi, Kuwaiti, Emirati, or Qatari ports would head toward this new man-made channel, cut through Omani territory, and emerge directly into open sea, far enough from Iran's coast that its missiles, fast attack boats, and sea mines suddenly matter a lot less. On paper, the distance isn't crazy. Depending on the exact route, you're looking at roughly 20 to 50 kilometers of land to cross, far shorter than the 80 kilometers of the Panama Canal or the nearly 200 kilometers of the Suez Canal. For a region that casually talks about trillion-dollar city projects, a few dozen kilometers of canal doesn't sound impossible. But then you look at the terrain. This is not soft desert sand you can dredge out with buckets. The Hadra Mountains dominate this region. towering ridges of dense rock that geologists describe as some of the toughest on the planet. You're not shaving off a hillside, you're cutting a trench big enough for the world's largest tankers through what is essentially a stone wall. It's the kind of plan that makes even seasoned engineers stare at the drawings, go silent for a moment, and then say, "Do you have any idea what you're proposing?" And yet, behind closed doors, that's exactly what Gulf planners are now evaluating. Let's talk numbers, because the scale of this thing is the story. To handle modern very large crude carriers, those massive ships that can stretch over 300 meters and carry hundreds of thousands of tons of oil, you need a canal that is at least around 25 meters deep and several hundred meters wide. That means millions upon millions of cubic meters of rock have to be drilled, blasted, and hauled away just to get to a rough channel, before you even start refining, stabilizing, and lining the banks. Early cost estimates for such a canal hover around the $200–300 billion mark. Some speculative engineering discussions put the lower bound near $100 billion, but almost no serious expert thinks it would come in that cheap once you account for the terrain, seismic risks, environmental protections, and the sheer difficulty of cutting through that kind of stone. For comparison, the expansion of the Panama Canal, a project hailed as one of the most complex engineering feats of recent decades, cost about $5 billion. This would be on a different planet scale-wise. And yet the Gulf is no longer treating that sticker shock as a deal-breaker. That's the key shift. What used to be a nice idea for the future is now being quietly reframed as a strategic necessity, even if it takes decades and hundreds of billions of dollars to complete. Rumors suggest that Saudi and Emirati planners have already commissioned new feasibility studies that incorporate AI-driven tunneling simulations, autonomous heavy machinery, and updated climate impact models. There's another wrinkle here: Oman. The Musandam Peninsula is Omani territory, and Musandam's strategic position at the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz has always given Oman a unique diplomatic card in the region. In recent years, Musandam has been highlighted as a strategic jewel, a sparsely populated but geopolitically vital region that lets Oman share control of one of the world's key choke points. Any canal carved through that land would require deep Omani buy-in, long-term revenue sharing, and ironclad security guarantees. That's one reason the Musandam Canal isn't the only path being discussed. If you can't go through the mountains, maybe you go around them, straight across the desert. Enter the alternative: a canal not through the Musandam Peninsula, but across Saudi Arabia itself. This concept, often linked to discussions of a King Salman Canal or similar mega-project labels, envisions a new waterway slicing across the Arabian Peninsula, stretching roughly 950 kilometers from the Gulf Coast to the Red Sea or Arabian Sea, through the vast Rub al-Khali, the Empty Quarter Desert. On paper, this route avoids the worst of the mountains. The Empty Quarter is one of the flattest, most desolate regions on Earth, an ocean of sand rather than solid rock. That makes excavation conceptually easier than blasting through the Hajar, but easier is relative. You're now dealing with nearly 1,000 kilometers of canal, brutal heat, intense evaporation, shifting dunes, and the need to maintain a stable water level and navigable channel across terrain that wants to move constantly. Conceptual parameters floating around in engineering circles talk about a canal around 25 meters deep and roughly 150 meters wide enough for two-way maritime traffic. That would require unimaginable amounts of earth moving, advanced dredging, and constant maintenance to keep desert sand from reclaiming the channel. Some discussions suggest total costs ranging anywhere from tens of billions in early optimistic scenarios to over $200–250 billion once reality is priced in. Still, the idea refuses to die. Why? Because the strategic payoff is enormous. A cross-desert canal could connect the Persian Gulf directly to either the Red Sea or Arabian Sea, creating a completely independent maritime corridor that not only bypasses the Strait of Hormuz, but also reshapes regional logistics. Vision 2030 style ambitions already talk about new cities, industrial hubs, tourism zones, and even artificial coastlines emerging along such a route. It's not just a canal. It's a whole new economic spine across the kingdom, and it's not just Saudi money that might be on the table. Reports and speculation online suggest that global players like China, already heavily invested in Gulf ports and energy infrastructure, are watching these canal discussions closely. For a country that imports massive volumes of Gulf oil and worries about U.S. influence over choke points, a neutral, Saudi-controlled land canal corridor could be extremely attractive. Rumors suggest that if the project moves beyond concept into concrete planning, foreign co-financing under broader Belt and Road frameworks could be part of the conversation. Still, these canals are decade-scale endeavors at best. They don't solve the crisis happening right now. So while those mega-drawings circulate, the Gulf has been busy building something more immediate, and in some ways, even more quietly revolutionary. While the world's attention locked on the Strait of Hormuz standoff, something else started happening on the Gulf of Oman coast. Ports that used to be secondary, or seen mainly as regional gateways, suddenly turned into lifelines. The UAE's Fujairah and Khor Fakkan ports, both sitting safely outside the Strait of Hormuz, have been pushed into overdrive as emergency export outlets. Take Khor Fakkan. It's a natural deep-water port set in a sheltered bay, ringed by the same Hajar mountains that make canal dreams so difficult. Yet here, the mountains act like a shield, not an obstacle, protecting ships from open sea conditions while giving them direct access to the Gulf of Oman without ever entering the strait. Operated by Gulf Taina, Khor Fakkan already has infrastructure capable of handling large container and tanker traffic. Expanding its capacity through new piers and integrated pipelines is far cheaper than carving a new sea. Estimates for immediate upgrades have been quoted in the hundreds of millions of dollars range, a rounding error compared to canal budgets. Then there's Fujairah. For years, the UAE has been building Fujairah into a major oil hub exactly because it sits outside Hormuz. Pipelines like the Habshan-Fujairah link already deliver crude from the interior directly to the Gulf of Oman coast, bypassing the strait entirely. As tensions spiked, Fujairah's terminals shifted into maximum capacity operations, turning what used to be backup routes into primary arteries overnight. Saudi Arabia hasn't been idle either. The kingdom's east-west pipeline, often called the Petra Line, stretches roughly 1,200 kilometers from oil fields in the east to the Red Sea port of Yanbu in the west. Originally built after painful lessons from regional conflicts decades ago, this pipeline can move millions of barrels per day without a single drop passing through Hormuz. During the crisis, that line transformed from a contingency into a central lifeline, sending crude straight to the Red Sea and out to global markets. Here's where the story gets even more interesting. It's not just about Saudi and Emirati oil anymore. As new pipeline links and agreements are discussed, Gulf planners are envisioning a regional web. Iraqi crude could be moved overland through Kuwait into Saudi or the UAE, then sent to Fujairah, Khor Fakkan, or Yanbu. Kuwaiti exports can piggyback on short cross-border pipeline connections. Even Qatar's non-LNG liquids, crude oil and condensates, are being considered for rerouting via new overland infrastructure. Is this system perfect? Not yet. Volumes are limited. Trucking millions of barrels per day isn't realistic, and current pipelines can't fully replace Hormuz traffic. But the direction is clear. Every new link, every expanded port, every added storage tank chips away at Iran's ability to threaten the world by pointing at a map. The Gulf is building redundancy into its energy routes. Multiple exits, multiple ports, multiple pipelines. If one node is hit, others keep working. If the strait closes, the bypass network keeps at least part of the flow alive. And as this web grows, something fundamental is happening to Iran's most prized strategic asset. Iran's entire naval strategy around the Strait of Hormuz was built like a custom-fit suit. Sea mines calibrated for shallow, narrow waters with predictable currents. Swarms of small, fast boats designed to overwhelm big tankers that have no room to maneuver. Coastal missile batteries positioned to cover a tight corridor where everything has to pass close enough to target. Drones configured to track and harass traffic funneled through one tiny exit. All of that hardware, all of that doctrine, all of those billions spent. It all assumed one thing, that the world had no choice but to keep using Hormuz. As long as every tanker had to slot through that 21-mile window, Iran didn't need to match US aircraft carriers or European fleets. It just needed to make that one point on the map too dangerous to ignore. But what happens when tankers increasingly stop going there? If energy exports are rerouted through Fujairah, Khor Fakkan, Yanbu, and potentially in the future man-made canals across mountains or deserts, then Iran's meticulously built Hormuz-centric arsenal starts to lose purpose. You can't mine a route ships don't take. You can't threaten pipelines that never touch your coastline. You can't use geography as leverage when your rivals have literally built new geography around you. That's the nightmare scenario for Tehran. Not that some base gets bombed, but that its main bargaining chip gradually becomes irrelevant. Rumors and expert commentary already suggest that Iranian planners are deeply worried about this shift. Reports claim there is increasing pressure on Tehran's leadership to demonstrate strength through missile tests, drone displays, or aggressive rhetoric precisely because the long-term trend is moving against them. The more the Gulf invests in bypass infrastructure, the less any future threat to Hormuz matters. It's like realizing halfway through a poker game that the card you've been bluffing with for years has secretly been removed from the deck. You can keep slamming it on the table, but sooner or later, everyone else notices it no longer counts. This is where the story stops being just about oil and starts being about something bigger. A new kind of strategic competition. Call it geoengineering warfare. Not in the climate sense, but in the way nations fight over geography itself. Instead of trying to win at the choke point, you erase the choke point from the game. Think about what the Suez Canal did to global trade in the 19th century. Think about what the Panama Canal did in the 20th. Each of those projects didn't just shorten routes, they shifted the balance of power. They changed which ports mattered, which navies could project influence, which economies could dominate shipping lanes. Canals and mega infrastructure don't just move ships, they move history. Now imagine a Middle East where Saudi Arabia and the UAE are not just oil exporters, but architects of the main routes that energy takes to reach the world. Imagine a network of pipelines, ports, and possibly canals that makes their exports both independent of Iran's threats and less dependent on US military protection. That's the direction they're moving in. Projects like the Salmon Canal concept are being discussed alongside broader Vision 2030 transformations, industrial zones, logistics hubs, new coastal cities, and AI-driven port operations. Infrastructure posts and expert analyses frame these canals not only as shipping shortcuts, but as tools to diversify economies, create jobs, and build new urban centers in regions that were previously empty desert. In that world, Gulf states sell more than oil. They sell reliability, they sell stability. They offer the world an energy supply chain that is harder to blackmail, harder to choke, and harder to disrupt with a single strike on a single strait. And once that perception takes hold in the minds of investors, insurers, and policymakers, Iran's ability to cause panic by simply threatening Hormuz plummets. That's geoengineering warfare in action, changing the physical infrastructure of the planet to rewrite who holds leverage. The Strait of Hormuz is not going to disappear. Ships will still pass through it for years. Iranian patrol boats will still cruise its waters. Coastal batteries will still sit on its shores. On a map, it will remain one of the world's key maritime choke points. But there's a difference between a choke point in theory and a choke point in practice. A narrow waterway only has power if the world depends on it. And what Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and their partners are doing through emergency bypass routes today and staggeringly ambitious canal plans for tomorrow is systematically reducing that dependence. Every incremental pipeline, every expanded port, every kilometer of canal that gets approved, financed, and built. That's why this isn't just another mega project story. It's a sovereignty story. For decades, Gulf governments were defined by what they sold, oil, and by who protected the routes that carried it, the United States and its allies patrolling Hormuz. Today they are pivoting toward a new identity, not just suppliers, but designers of the system itself, not passengers on somebody else's shipping map, but the ones drawing the lines. If the Muzandam Canal or a cross-desert Salmon Canal ever becomes reality, the price tag will be historic. $200 billion, maybe more. But the thing it buys can't be measured in dollars, a permanent end to one of the most effective geopolitical blackmail tools of the modern era. A world where Iran's mines, missiles, and naval swarms are no longer the shadow behind every oil price spike, but relics of a strategy that the engineering of its neighbors rendered obsolete. The maps of the Middle East aren't being redrawn by armies this time. They're being redrawn by surveyors, engineers, AI models, and construction crews, meter by meter. The Strait of Hormuz will still be there. It just may no longer be where the story of global energy is decided. And if you want to follow how this story evolves, how bypass pipelines expand, how the Salmon Canal discussions mature, and how Iran reacts as its old leverage slips away, make sure you're subscribed and notifications are on. There's a lot of talk about missiles and warplanes in this region, but the real power shift might be happening quietly in blueprints, budget meetings, and the first cuts of steel on projects that change the game before anyone hears the blast.